My name is Rye Miller. I'm 32 years old, and in the high-frequency trading floor of the Miller family, I'm the only one whose stock never rises. 3 weeks ago, my parents stood up at their 40th wedding anniversary dinner in a glass-walled dining room overlooking Lake Washington, where the air was filtered and the atmosphere was programmed for maximum prestige, and announced to 30 guests, "We're taking the whole family to Hawaii next week for another celebration." The announcement was delivered with my father's keynote address voice, the one he used to launch IPOs before he retired from the board. Everyone clapped. My sister Sloane let out a curated, high-pitched squeal that sounded like a notification alert on a brand-new app. I smiled, already imagining a week where I wouldn't have to debug my mother's iPad or reconcile the family's foundation ledgers. This was supposed to be my first real vacation in years, a break from the relentless gray of Seattle and the even more relentless demands of being the Millers' unpaid operational manager. Then I made the mistake of asking a simple question. "What time is our flight?" My father looked at me like I was a legacy system trying to run a high-speed algorithm. My mother's smile tightened, the Botox in her forehead barely twitching as she maintained her Seattle luxury real estate composure. And in front of every guest in that room, standing amidst the smart lighting and the minimalist decor, my dad said, "You don't need to know, Rye. You're not part of this trip. Someone has to stay behind and take care of the kids." 30 pairs of eyes. 30 tech founders, venture capitalists, and luxury developers stared at me, their faces caught in the awkward silence of a system crash. 30 witnesses to the moment my family told me I wasn't really family at all. I was just the technical support. But here's what they didn't know. I had a secret, one I'd been building for 3 years in a rented locker down by the ship canal. And that night, as the scent of expensive Pinot Noir filled the room like a taunt, I decided it was finally time to execute my own exit strategy. Before I tell you what happened next, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if the story resonates with you and you've ever felt like the only person in the room with a soul. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now, to understand why I walked away from everything I knew, let me take you back to the beginning. The Miller family lives in a smart home mansion in the suburbs of Seattle. It's a monument to glass and cedar, where the heating is controlled by an AI that knows your body temperature before you do. 4 bedrooms, 2-car garage, lawn trimmed to HOA perfection. The kind of house that screams, "We made it," to anyone driving by. It's the kind of house that prioritizes optics over intimacy, built on the premise that if you can't measure it, it doesn't exist. My father, Arthur Miller, retired 3 years ago from his position as a CEO of a major cloud computing firm. He spends his days analyzing his diversified portfolio and treating every family dinner like a quarterly earnings call. My mother, Eleanor, has never worked a paid job in her life, but she'll tell you she's busier than any CEO. She manages the family's social capital, chairing the tech philanthropy board, organizing neighborhood fundraisers, maintaining what she calls our family's reputation. To Eleanor, reputation is a non-fungible token that must be protected at all costs. Then there's my sister Sloane, 3 years younger than me, married to Sterling Hartley, a venture capitalist at a firm downtown whose name she drops into every conversation like she's pitching a unicorn startup. They have 2 kids, a 5-year-old named Oliver and a 3-year-old named Sophie, and a brand new Porsche Taycan that always gets the prime spot in our parents' driveway, next to the Level 2 EV charger. My Honda Civic, the one I've been driving for 10 years and looks like a fossil in this neighborhood, it gets parked on the street. "Rye, move your car," my mother would say whenever I visited. "Sterling's bringing the Thai con, and guests notice what's in the driveway first. It's about the brand identity, sweetie." I never questioned it. I just moved my car. That's the thing about being the invisible one in your family. You learn to accept the lowest priority in the bandwidth. You stop noticing all the small ways they've already decided you don't matter. The nicer parking spot, the better seat at the table, the way your mother introduces your sister to guests by her husband's net worth. While you're just Rye. She helps out. I work as a part-time accountant, mostly remote clients, flexible hours, modest income. I'm the one who makes sure the numbers balance, while they focus on the vision. Nothing impressive by Miller family standards, but I never told them about the other thing I do. The thing that keeps me sane in a world of spreadsheets and smart homes. The thing I started 3 years ago after my life fell apart in a different way. I never told them I'd learned to see. Let me paint you a picture of what helping out looks like in a high-tech family. Thanksgiving. I arrive at 6 a.m., the Seattle mist clinging to the windows, to start the organic free-range turkey. I set the table with my mother's Wedgwood china, the set I'm not allowed to use, only to wash. I arrange the flowers, polish the silver, coordinate the timing of 7 side dishes. Sloan arrives at noon in a cashmere sweater, kisses everyone hello, and sits down to be served, complaining about the burnout of being an influencer, while I'm sweating over a convection oven. Christmas. Same routine, plus wrapping all the presents my mother bought because her carpal tunnel is acting up. Funny how her carpal tunnel never stops her from scrolling through social media 3 hours a day. Birthday parties for my niece and nephew. I'm the entertainment coordinator, the cleanup crew, and the backup babysitter all in one. Last year, I spent 8 hours running Oliver's dinosaur-themed party in 40-degree rain, while Sloan got a cryotherapy session because she needed a break. The one time I asked if maybe, just maybe, I could skip a family event because I had a deadline for a client, my mother's voice went cold. "Family comes first, Rye. We all make sacrifices." Except I'm the only one who ever seems to make them. In the Miller household, my time is treated like a shared utility. Always available, never billed. The breaking point comes in small moments, like a line of code that finally crashes the whole program. Like the year I got my Christmas gift, a kitchen apron that said, "World's Best Aunt," in glittery letters. Sloan gave it to me. She smiled like she'd done something thoughtful. I wore it. I wore it every single time I came over to cook, clean, and babysit. It was my uniform of subordination. Do you want to know when I realized the truth? It hit me one random Tuesday evening while I was scrubbing my mother's expensive copper pans after yet another family dinner. I couldn't remember the last time anyone had invited me somewhere without expecting me to work. I was a guest with a job description. 3 years ago, my life fell apart. I'd been dating a man named Caleb for 4 years. We talked about marriage, about kids, about a future. Then one evening, he sat me down and said the words I'll never forget. "I love you, Rye, but I don't think I'm in love with you anymore. You're just there. You're always just there. Always just there. Like a background process running on a computer that no one bothers to shut down. Like furniture. Like wallpaper." After he left, I wandered into a pawn shop in the industrial district. I don't know why. Maybe I was looking for something that didn't require an internet connection. That's when I saw it. A professional-grade offset smoker. Used, rusted but solid, heavy as a tank. I bought it with money I should have saved. I told no one. That smoker became my secret, my lens into a world of wood, fire, and time. I started studying the Maillard reaction, the science of smoke rings, and the precise physics of heat management. Things most people ignore. The way a piece of brisket transforms from tough fiber to silk. People who society looks right through. The same way my family looks right through me. I called the series The Smokehouse. I created an anonymous Instagram account. No face, no real name, just the photos. Over 3 years, I gathered 12,000 followers, people who crave something real in a digital world. I kept the dry rubs wrapped in an old cashmere scarf at the back of my closet. It was the only thing I ever kept for myself. 3 weeks before my parents' anniversary party, I got an email that I almost deleted as spam. It was from a massive culinary foundation in Austin, Texas, the Lone Star Smoke-Off, asking if I'd be interested in discussing my work. I stared at that email for 20 minutes before I realized my hands were shaking. My pulse was 120 beats per minute. But for once, it wasn't from stress. But I didn't reply. Not yet. Because good things didn't happen to people like me. There's one person in my family who actually sees me. Her name is Cass, and she's my mother's younger sister. Aunt Cass is what my mother calls the family disappointment. She never married. She followed her passion for smoke and fire instead of getting a real job. 20 years ago, she moved to Austin to open a small barbecue shack with a gravel parking lot and a pit in the back. My mother hasn't forgiven her since. Cass threw away her potential, my mother likes to say. She could have had a good life, but she chose to play with charcoal. I've been calling Aunt Cass every Sunday night for 7 years. My mother doesn't know. It was Aunt Cass who first saw my recipes. I'd sent her one, just one, testing the waters, and her response made me cry. Rye, this is extraordinary. You have a gift for the fire. Nobody had ever called anything I did extraordinary. She was the one who encouraged me to keep cooking, to keep posting. And she was the one who 3 weeks before my parents' anniversary said something that changed everything. Rye, I hope you don't mind, but I sent her Instagram link to someone, a famed pitmaster and critic I know in Texas. His name is Silas Thorne. He's looking for emerging talent. I nearly dropped the phone. Aunt Cass, that's the foundation that emailed me. I know, sweetheart. He told me he wants to talk to you about a head chef residency and an investor's showcase. My heart pounding. But that's real. That's an actual career thing. Yes, it is. Her voice was gentle but firm. And you deserve it. You don't need anyone's permission to pursue what you love. I learned that lesson late. You don't have to. That night, I replied to Silas Thorne's email. The invisible woman was finally stoking the fire. I sat in the glow of my dual monitor setup for an hour after Aunt Cass hung up, the silence of my apartment feeling like a system standby mode. Now, let me bring you to the night that changed everything. My parents' 40th wedding anniversary. A milestone worthy of a party, according to my mother, which meant 30 guests, a catered menu that I would assist with to save money, and an evening of celebrating the Miller family's 4 decades of picture-perfect, venture-backed marriage. To Eleanor, this wasn't just a dinner. It was a high-stakes networking event designed to maintain our family's market share in the Seattle social scene. The preparation started a week before. I watched the Outlook calendar with a sense of impending dread, knowing that my own output was about to be sacrificed for their optics. I took 3 days off from my accounting clients at the tech hub in Bellevue to help set up. I had to apologize to 2 Series A startups for delaying their burn rate reports, just so I could troubleshoot the smart lighting protocols for a dinner Patty insisted would be legendary. I ordered flowers, white roses and peonies per my mother's specifications. I spent 4 hours coordinating with a boutique florist in Capitol Hill, ensuring the arrangements were minimalist yet disruptive, as per the mood board Eleanor had shared on Slack. I hand-wrote 60 place cards in the calligraphy she insisted upon. My hand was cramped and stained with archival ink, each card a reminder of a manual task they deemed below their own pay grade, but perfect for mine. I coordinated with the caterer, a high-strung fusion chef who treated a suburban kitchen like a Michelin-starred battlefield. I pressed the linen tablecloths until the air was thick with the scent of starch and high-pressure steam, and I polished the crystal glasses that had been a wedding gift 40 years ago. Each glass felt like a fragile unit of social capital, easily broken if the wrong user touched it. On the day of the party, I arrived at 7 a.m. The gray Seattle mist was rolling off Lake Washington, a cold fog that matched the temperature in our foyer. I wore jeans and a t-shirt because there was no point dressing up when I'd be in the kitchen debugging the wine cooler's temperature sensors for the next 10 hours. I was the invisible back-end developer of this evening's user experience. By 6 p.m., the house looked perfect. Candles glowed on every surface, their light reflecting off the floor-to-ceiling glass walls that overlooked the water. The dining table stretched across the living room, set for 30, with my mother's finest china. It looked like a set from a Scandinavian architectural film, curated to hide the fact that nobody in this house actually spoke to one another without a screen. I had changed into a simple black dress. Nothing fancy, nothing that would draw attention. It was a dress designed to be a background process. "Rye!" My mother's voice caught me in the hallway. She looked me up and down, frowning, her eyes performing a quick quality control check on my appearance. "Is that what you're wearing?" "It's black. I thought it was appropriate." "It's fine, I suppose. Just stay in the background. Today is about your father and me. We don't need any errors in the aesthetic today." I nodded. I felt the familiar weight of being a bug in her system. I always nodded. Compliance was the only way to avoid a full system reboot with Eleanor. Guests began arriving at 7. The men in sports coats, the women in cocktail dresses, old colleagues, church friends, neighbors whose lawns were as immaculate as ours. It was a gathering of the 1% of the 1%. A room full of people who calculated life in growth cycles and quarterly dividends. 30 people who thought they knew the Miller family. They knew the public-facing dashboard, the high-res version of our lives. None of them knew me at all. To them, I was the girl who handed out the hors d'oeuvres and fixed the Wi-Fi when it dropped. And in 3 hours, that wouldn't matter anymore. Sloan arrived at 7:15, perfectly timed for maximum impact. The golden child never enters a room. She initiates a launch sequence. She swept through the front door in a red wrap dress, a designer piece she'd tagged the brand for on Instagram before even stepping out of the car, with Sterling behind her in a charcoal suit and their 2 children dressed like tiny tech executives from a Silicon Valley catalog. My mother rushed to embrace her over how beautiful she looked, how handsome Sterling was, how precious the grandchildren were. The foyer was suddenly filled with the artificial warmth of a well-funded PR campaign. I watched from the kitchen doorway, holding a tray of Wagyu beef appetizers. The platter felt heavier than the 10 pounds of silver it was made of. "Everyone, you remember my daughter Sloane and her husband Sterling," my mother announced to the room, her voice reaching that pitch of social triumph she reserved for Harper's successes. "Sterling's a senior partner at Hartley Venture Capital. They just closed a $200 million fund last year. We're so proud." Applause, smiles, congratulations. The room hummed with the frequency of money, acknowledging more money. My mother never mentioned that I was the one who'd handled the quarterly tax filings for Sterling's personal holdings for 3 years. Free of charge, naturally. In their eyes, my expertise was a standard family feature, not a professional service. I circulated with appetizers, refilled wine glasses, answered questions from guests who didn't recognize me. I moved like a ghost through the clusters of people talking about pivoting and exit strategies. "Are you with the catering company?" one woman asked, reaching for a truffle bite. She didn't look at my face, only at the tray, as if I were an automated serving unit. Before I could answer, my mother appeared. "Oh, that's Rye, my other daughter. She's helping out tonight. She's our little logistics genius." The word "other" felt like a 404 error code for my identity. The woman smiled politely and turned away. My mother didn't notice. She never noticed how she used me as the invisible infrastructure for her own social climbing. At one point, Sterling approached me with Sophie squirming in his arms and Oliver tugging at his jacket. He looked like a man who had forgotten how to handle anything that didn't have a user interface. "Hey, can you take them? Sloane and I need to mingle. We've got some potential investors in the corner." Not "would you mind?" Not "thank you." Just "can you take them?" Like passing off a low-performing asset. I took them. I fed them dinner in the kitchen, while the real movers and shakers toasted to their success in the dining room. I wiped Sophie's face when she spilled juice on her dress. I told Oliver 3 stories to keep him from running into the living room and disrupting the party. I sat on the white marble floor in my black dress, surrounded by dinosaur toys and half-eaten nuggets, while the sounds of success mocked me through the soundproofed walls. When I finally emerged, dessert was being served. I hadn't eaten anything all day. My blood sugar was crashing faster than a bad server. No one had thought to save me a plate. The salted caramel tart was gone, leaving only crumbs on the white tablecloth. The announcement came at 9 o'clock, right after my mother's dessert was served. My father stood up, tapping his champagne glass with the fork. The sound was sharp and digital in the high-tech silence of the room. The room fell silent. 30 faces turned toward him with expectant smiles. "Eleanor and I want to thank you all for being here tonight," he began, his voice warm with practiced charm. It was the voice of a man who had mastered the art of the presentation. 40 years of marriage, 4 decades of building this family, this life, this home." My mother beamed beside him, the light catching her diamond necklace like a signal flare. Sloane reached for Sterling's hand, positioning herself for the inevitable press release photo. I stood near the kitchen doorway, still holding a dirty dessert plate. A streak of chocolate on my sleeve was my only souvenir of the evening. "And to celebrate this milestone," my father continued, "we have a surprise announcement." He paused for effect. My mother's eyes sparkled with the secret they'd been caching all night. "Next week, we're taking the whole family to Hawaii. 1 week at the Four Seasons Lanai. A private jet celebration. Just the Millers." The room erupted in appreciative murmurs. How visionary. What a legacy! You two deserve the upgrade. Sloane actually squealed. Dad, that's amazing! The kids are going to love the private terminal. I felt a sudden surge of adrenaline. The whole family. That meant me too. Maybe I finally had a seat at the table. Maybe the system was finally acknowledging my contributions. For once, I wouldn't be the support staff. I'd be a stakeholder. I imagined the heat of the Hawaiian sun, 85 degrees Fahrenheit, a world away from the spreadsheets and Seattle mist. I stepped forward, allowing myself a small smile. That sounds incredible. What time is our flight? The question hung in the air like a dropped packet. My father's expression shifted. The executive warmth vanished, replaced by the cool, detached logic of a CEO cutting costs. He glanced at my mother. Something passed between them, a look I'd seen 1,000 times, but never understood until that moment. It was the look of two people who had already finalized the budget without me. Rye, he said slowly, his voice dropping into a tone usually reserved for a junior employee who had overstepped. You don't need to know the flight time. The room went quiet. Not the comfortable silence of anticipation, but the tense quiet of a critical failure. I could feel the tech titan's eyes shifting, sensing the glitch in the Miller family narrative. I don't understand, I heard myself say. My voice sounded distorted, even to me. My father cleared his throat. Because you're not going. 30 pairs of eyes. That's how many people watched my father tell me I wasn't part of the family upgrade. The humiliation was a physical weight, like a high-latency lag that made everything slow and heavy. Someone needs to stay behind, my mother added, as if this were the most logical thing in the world, her tone as smooth as a polished screen. Sloane and Sterling need a real break. Their burnout is at an all-time high. That means you'll watch the children. It's the most efficient use of resources, Rye. But I started... Rye, honestly. My mother's tone sharpened, cutting me off with the precision of a hard delete. You don't have anything important to do. Sloane works hard on her brand. She deserves the downtime. You're flexible. Your accounting can happen anywhere, even from the playroom. Sloane works hard. Sloane, who spent her days taking selfies in Pilates classes and curating her life. Sloane, who had a virtual assistant for her emails and a nanny for the kids 3 days a week, and still complained about the bandwidth of her life. It's just a week, Sterling added, not even looking at me, as he checked the stock tickers on his Apple Watch. But kids love you. It's the logical choice. I stood there in my plain black dress, holding a dirty plate, while 30 people watched me be deprioritized by my own family. I felt like a legacy app that had just been uninstalled to make room for a newer version. Some of them looked uncomfortable. Most of them just looked away, returning to their talk of crypto and venture capital. One woman, I didn't know her name, leaned toward her husband and whispered something. He nodded. I caught the words, "Poor thing, she's just the family utility player." The words were a spike in my heart. Utility player. As if my value was only measured by what I could do for them. The champagne glass in my hand was shaking. I set down the plate, set down the glass, because I didn't trust my hardware to hold up. I didn't want to provide them with the spectacle of a breakdown. Of course, I heard myself say. I understand. I smiled, the smile I'd learned to wear after 32 years of being the one who helps out. the one who provides the support, the one who is always, always just there. But in the deep background of my mind, the code was changing. Something inside me had finally cracked. Not broken, cracked. Like a screen protector after a hard drop. The invisible woman was finally preparing for a hard reboot. I excused myself to the kitchen, moving with the silent efficiency of a background process that everyone assumes will never crash. I leaned against the cold white quartz island and closed my eyes, the hum of the smart refrigerator feeling like the low-frequency vibration of a server room. For the first time in my life, I started making a different kind of plan. It wasn't a spreadsheet for the Miller Family Foundation or a grocery list for Sterling's keto diet. It was an exit strategy, a complete migration of my soul away from Seattle. The party continued without me. Of course it did. The Miller family machine was built for maximum uptime, regardless of who was being crushed in the gears. I stayed in the kitchen, mechanically washing dishes, while laughter and tech talk drifted in from the living room, like the muffled noise of a high-end corporate lounge. At some point, Sloane appeared, her red dress swishing against the minimalist cabinetry. She looked luminous under the LED strip lighting, her skin glowing from $1,000 worth of monthly facials. "Rye, don't be upset," she said, reaching for my arm with hands that only ever touched touchscreens and Pilates reformers. "You know how it is. Sterling and I really need this bandwidth. It's been so stressful lately with the kids and the Series B funding round we're leading." I kept washing, the scalding water hitting my hands, reminding me that I was still alive, still capable of feeling heat. "I understand. Besides, you're so good with Oliver and Sophie. They'll barely notice we're gone. You're basically their human operating system." I rinsed a hand-blown crystal glass, set it in the drying rack, said nothing. Sloane sighed the way she always does when she thinks I'm being low performance, a soft, condescending exhale of annoyance. "Look, it's just a week, and you don't have, like, a partner or a real job tying you down. Your schedule is flexible." Flexible. To them, it meant my life was liquid enough to be poured into whatever cracks they needed filling. As if my time had no value because I wasn't scaling a startup. "Sterling made a list," she continued, pulling out her iPhone 15, the screen illuminating her face with that surgical high-resolution glow. "Their schedules, nutrient profile requirements. Sophie can't have gluten, remember? It triggers her inflammation markers. And there's this new thing with Oliver's ear. He might need drops. I'll slack you everything." She didn't ask if I was willing. She just assumed, treating my life like an API she could call whenever she needed a task executed. That's when Sterling appeared, loosening his tie, the air of a man who had just dominated a boardroom. "All sorted. Great. We're heading out early tomorrow to prep. Sloane, your mother wants some high-res photos before we leave. We need to update the family brand on LinkedIn." They were gone before I could respond. Not that I would have. Not that I ever did. But as I stood there alone in my mother's smart kitchen, staring at the list of parental protocols Sloane had just messaged me, a single thought crystallized in my mind. It was a quiet digital revolution happening in the dark. They don't see me as family. They see me as human infrastructure, and even the most stable systems eventually reach their end of life. The invisible woman was preparing to go offline, permanently. It was almost midnight when I found the emails. The last guests had finally left, the smart locks clicking into place with a mechanical finality. My parents had gone to bed, exhausted from accepting 40 years' worth of social dividends for a marriage that was mostly a well-funded partnership agreement. I was alone in the living room, folding the organic cotton tablecloths, when I realized I needed to send a file to a client whose deadline I'd pushed back for this event. The weight of my real life was finally starting to push back against their demands. My laptop was at home. My mother's was on the counter, a top-of-the-line MacBook Pro that she used for charity board minutes and stalking her rivals on real estate portals. She won't mind, I told myself. She'd used my technical skills 1,000 lists without paying for them, treating my brain as a free help desk. I opened the laptop. Chrome was already running. And there it was, my mother's Gmail, still logged in. I should have clicked away immediately. I should have minded my own business. But when you've been treated like a background process, you eventually want to see the source code. I saw my name in the subject line of a recent thread. Hawaii Logistics, Rise Availability. My finger hovered over the trackpad. I knew I shouldn't. I knew whatever I found would be a direct hit to my system, a virus I couldn't uninstall. I clicked anyway. The thread was between my mother and Sloan, starting a week before the party. From Eleanor Miller to Sloan Hartley. Keep Rye here to manage the kids. She doesn't have anything high value on her plate anyway. Sterling was right. It's like having an unpaid intern with family loyalty. She should be grateful we keep her in the loop. It gives her life some structure. And Sloane's reply. Totally agree, Mom. She'll probably feel productive for once. It's kind of sad, honestly, seeing her stagnate. But at least it solves our childcare overhead. Sterling says it saves us $5,000 on a private travel manny. I read those words 3 times to make sure I understood the architecture of their betrayal. The language was so cold, so transactional. It felt like reading a cost-benefit analysis of my own worth. Unpaid intern, grateful, childcare overhead. The Miller family wealth was built on the uncompensated labor of my soul. I took screenshots. I sent them to my private cloud storage. I deleted the history and signed out with a hand that was surprisingly steady. Then I sat in my mother's dark kitchen, in the house where I'd grown up, and finally let myself see the cold, hard data. I wasn't the daughter who helped out. I was the variable they used to balance their own luxury. I drove home at 1 o'clock in the morning through the rainy streets of Seattle, the wipers rhythmic against the windshield like a countdown. My apartment was small, a studio in a building in South Lake Union that felt like a shoebox compared to their mansion. Concrete walls, minimal furniture I'd bought secondhand from tech workers moving to Silicon Valley. My mother had called it clinical, but it was mine, the only place where I wasn't being monitored for performance. I sat in the darkness for a long time, staring at my phone. The email from Silas Thorne glowed on the screen, the one I'd been too paralyzed to answer. It was the signal I'd been waiting for, a beacon from a warmer climate. We'd exchanged a few messages about a potential residency in Austin. He wanted to see my techniques in person. He was excited about my heat mapping approach to brisket. I could go. I could actually go. The thought felt like a hard reboot of my entire existence. I picked up my phone and called the only person who would understand. Aunt Cass answered on the second ring, her voice a gravelly comfort amidst the Seattle cold. "Rye, you still awake?" I told her everything. The party, the announcement, the unpaid intern email. My voice cracked exactly once when I read aloud the words, childcare overhead. It was the sound of a system finally reaching its breaking point. When I finished, there was a long silence on the line, filled only by the crackle of long-distance energy. Then Aunt Cass said something that became my new prime directive. "Rye, I have a smoker out back that needs a steady hand, and a spare room that needs a tenant who doesn't take anyone's crap. Austin is 100 degrees Fahrenheit and 100% real. You come here. You find your fire." The Millers can find their own damn intern. Aunt Cass, I can't just... Yes, you can. You can disconnect. You can choose yourself for once. The only thing stopping you is the fear of their disapproval. But you can't pay rent with their approval, honey. I hung up at 2 o'clock in the morning. By 6, I'd started packing. It was an exercise in extreme minimalism. 3 suitcases, my kitchen scales, my internal temperature probes, my laptop. I didn't pack the guilt. I only packed the tools for the person I was becoming. I left behind the "World's Best Aunt" apron hanging on a hook like a warning sign for whoever came after me. For the first time in 32 years, I was choosing my own path. The Civic was packed, the GPS was set for Austin, and the rain was finally starting to let up. If you've made it this far, I want to ask you something. Have you ever had to choose between being the reliable one and being the real one? Have you ever reached a point where staying felt like a slow death? Tell me in the comments, what would you do? Would you stay and be the unpaid intern? Or would you crash their system and leave? Would you play it safe? Or would you pivot to a life that burns? And if this story matters to you, please hit that like button. Now, let me tell you what happened when I told them I was going offline. 2 days before my family's private jet trip to Hawaii, I drove to the Smart Mansion one last time. The security gate hummed as it recognized my plates, a privilege I was about to revoke. My mother was in the living room coordinating vacation palettes, her iPad synced to the smart lights to show how the fabrics would look in the midday Maui sun. Sloane sat on the sofa, reviewing the itinerary on a shared Google Doc. Sterling was somewhere in the glass office, probably disrupting another industry over Zoom. My father was analyzing his stock portfolio in his ergonomic chair, the way he always did, present in his high net worth world, absent from mine. He was the CEO of a family that was currently facing a major resignation. "I need to tell you something," I said from the threshold of the living room. My voice was level, calibrated for a high-stakes meeting. My mother barely looked up. "If it's about the kids' organic snacks, Sloane added them to the shared list. Make sure you check the delivery time." "It's not about that." I steadied my voice. "I'm not watching the kids. I won't be available." That got their attention. Sloane's head snapped up, her phone frozen in her hand. My mother's hand stopped moving over a pile of linen. "What do you mean, not available?" my mother asked, her tone shifting into crisis management mode. "I have an opportunity in Texas. I'm leaving tomorrow." "Texas?" My father swiveled his chair, his eyes narrowing as if he were looking at a bad quarterly report. "What kind of opportunity? Since when did you have business in Austin?" "It's a residency. Something I've been developing in my flexible time. I didn't owe them the technical specs of the Lone Star Smoke-Off. I didn't owe them my business plan. I didn't owe them a single byte of data." Sloane's face twisted into a mask of pure entitlement. "Rye, you can't be serious. I'm counting on you. We all optimized the trip around this. Sterling and I have 3 deep tissue massages booked." "You optimized around me without consulting me," I said, the truth of it hitting the room like a server crash. I'm not canceling my future because you assumed I didn't have one. The silence was absolute. The only sound was the white noise of the air purification system. Then my mother stood up, her voice cold as an ice storage unit. This is incredibly selfish, Rye. Sloan needs this reset. Family comes first. Family comes first, I repeated, the words sounding like a hollow marketing slogan. Except when it comes to the private jet to Hawaii. Her mouth opened, then closed. The logic was undeniable. And for Eleanor Miller, being caught in an illogical lie was the ultimate defeat. For once, she had nothing to say. My father cleared his throat, his boss persona taking over. If you leave now, you're breaking the contract of this family. Don't expect us to provide a safety net if you fail in Texas. I understand, I said. And for the first time, I meant it. I didn't need a safety net. I needed a fire. The next 24 hours were a masterclass in psychological warfare, a coordinated DDoS attack on my emotional bandwidth. My mother called 6 times. Each voicemail was a calculated mix of corporate disappointment and maternal guilt, her voice oscillating between a high-frequency hiss and a low, tremulous sob that sounded suspiciously rehearsed. You're crashing this family, Rye. I hope you can live with the downtime you're causing. Your father is in a state of total system failure. He barely touched his kale salad. The stress of your rebellion is spiking his blood pressure. I knew the algorithm by heart. It was the same one she used whenever a resource attempted to reallocate itself. Sloan sent a barrage of messages. The children were apparently asking why Aunt Rye was deleting them. They were using Oliver and Sophie as emotional malware, trying to bypass my firewalls by weaponizing their innocence. Sloan took a different route, weaponized vulnerability. Rye, I don't understand why you're doing this to me. We're a team. How am I supposed to scale my brand and manage 2 kids without my support system? It's like you're pulling the power cord in the middle of a critical update. And then the text that was meant to be the kill shot. You're going to end up alone, you know, just like Aunt Cass. Is that what you want? To be a hermit in the desert, covered in soot? I stared at that message for a long time, the blue light of the iPhone burning into my retinas. Just like Aunt Cass. They meant it as a threat, a picture of a failed life in the industrial wasteland of Texas. But Aunt Cass had her own business, her own fire, her own life built on her own terms. Aunt Cass was authentic. Maybe ending up like Aunt Cass wasn't a warning. Maybe it was the ultimate upgrade. I turned off my phone. The silence that followed was the first time in 30 years I wasn't waiting for an incoming command. The last thing I did before I left Seattle was walk through my studio apartment. 3 suitcases by the door. Everything else would stay behind. The concrete walls, the minimalist desk, the life I'd been living as an unpaid consultant for the Millers. It was a sterile, low-latency existence that I was finally purging. I taped my key to an envelope and slid it under my landlord's door. Month-to-month lease, paid through the end of January. Clean break. No data left on the drive. No reason to look back at the rain. I loaded my car as the sun tried, and failed, to break through the Seattle gray. The sky was the color of an unpowered monitor. My Honda Civic, 10 years old and reliable as a mechanical keyboard, the same car my mother had been embarrassed to have in her circular driveway. It was a vintage piece of hardware, but today, it was my escape pod. It was going to carry me to a new climate. I didn't look back as I pulled away from the curb. The glass towers of Seattle were a receding blur in my rear-view mirror, their polished surfaces reflecting a world I no longer wanted to be a part of. The drive from Seattle to Austin takes about 32 hours if you push it. That's over 2,100 miles of changing biomes, from the Pacific Northwest pines to the high desert of Utah and the endless horizon of West Texas. I didn't push it. I took 5 days to traverse the country, treating the journey like a slow-motion migration of my entire operating system. I stopped at roadside motels where the carpet smelled of industrial cleaner and the coffee was strong enough to jumpstart a truck. I ate at diners where nobody knew my family's net worth, sipping burnt Java and watching the landscape shift from green to gold to rust. Somewhere in Wyoming, I pulled over at a rest stop and just sat there watching the sun drop behind the mountains. The air was crisp and dry, smelling of sagebrush and total autonomy. I photographed it, not for an Instagram feed, but for my own internal archives. My first shot as a free woman. The unpaid intern was finally capturing her own data. On the third day, my phone buzzed with a text from Sloan. I turned it back on to check the weather in the Panhandle. Mom says, "If you're not home when we get back from Maui, you're dead to the family trust." The threat was so quintessentially Eleanor Miller that I almost laughed. I read it once, then I deleted the thread. She was already treating me like a deprecated feature anyway. I had been a background process in her life for 3 decades. At least now, I'd be the lead developer of my own. On the 4th day, I called Aunt Cass from a truck stop in New Mexico. The heat was rising, the thermometer hitting 92 degrees Fahrenheit, and the air felt like a physical weight. "I'm about 8 hours out," I said, my voice sounding resonant and grounded for the first time since college. "Your pit is ready, Rye. I've got the post oak seasoned and the spare room aired out. And Silas? He's coming by tomorrow afternoon for a tasting. He's heard about your temperature control algorithms." My stomach flipped. "Tomorrow? That's a tight deadline." "Rye." Her voice was gravelly and sure. "You've been prepping for this for 3 years. It's not a deadline. It's your launch date." Launch date. The word felt like a countdown reaching 0. When I crossed the Texas border, something shifted. The Seattle mist was replaced by a brutal, honest sun. The Texas sky appeared vast and endless, a dome of pale blue that seemed to challenge you to fill it. The heat was an intense, dry pressure that forced you to be present. I rolled down my window and breathed in the scent of cedar and dry earth for the first time. It was hot and heavy, filling my lungs with the reality of the South. I cried then, not out of sorrow, but out of total system relief. The overwhelming sensation of a life finally beginning to scale. At 7 p.m. on the 5th day, I pulled into the gravel lot of the smokehouse, Aunt Cass's legendary barbecue shack on the outskirts of Austin. She was waiting on the porch of a weathered wooden building, arms open, wearing a grease-stained apron like it was couture. "Welcome to the real world, kid," she said, and for the first time in 32 years, home wasn't a smart house with a security code. It was a place with a soul. The Miller Mansion had been a data center. This was a sanctuary of salt and smoke. Austin is a world that feels alive in its bones. It's a landscape of live oaks, neon signs on South Congress, and the constant, intoxicating perfume of wood smoke drifting from steel pits. It felt like a world where you were judged by the quality of your bark, rather than the brand of your car. Aunt Cass's place sat on a dusty acre with 3 massive offset smokers out back, hissing like dragons in the twilight. The smokehouse, a hand-painted sign with a flickering neon pig, wooden shutters, and benches that had seen 30 years of hungry travelers. The air was thick with the scent of rendered fat and peppercorns. My room was above the kitchen, small, hot, but vibrant. A bed with a simple quilt, a window that looked directly out at the smokers, and a view of the Texas stars that made my chest ache. It was the pain of a heart finally finding its true north. "You'll take the 4 a.m. fire check," Aunt Cass explained, over a plate of brisket that melted like butter. We sat on the back porch, the sound of cicadas providing a rhythmic soundtrack to the crackle of the post oak. 4 a.m. to noon. After that, the kitchen is yours to experiment. No spreadsheets to balance, no private jets to track. "I don't know how to thank you, Cass." She waved a calloused hand. "Don't thank me. Just build your legacy. That's the only currency I accept. I want to see what happens when a miller stops managing people and starts managing the fire." The next morning, I woke at 3:45 a.m. The air was still warm, the humidity a soft blanket. I tied on a heavy canvas apron, not the glittery world's best aunt one I'd left in a dumpster in Seattle. This was a tool, not a costume. I learned how to manage the airflow in a 1,000-gallon smoker, balancing the oxygen to keep the smoke thin and blue, not thick and bitter. Customers started arriving at 11 a.m., locals in work trucks, tourists with maps, people who knew Aunt Cass by the quality of her ribs. I took orders, sliced brisket with a precise 1/4-inch margin, and talked to people who didn't care about my GPA or my sister's Instagram. To them, I was just Rye, the new pit boss in training, and that utility was the most honest thing I'd ever felt. By noon, I'd made $60 in tips and had sweat through my shirt. My skin smelled of oak smoke and salt, and I felt incredible. At 2 o'clock, I had a meeting with Silas Thorne at a private table in the back. I didn't wear a designer dress. I wore my work clothes, the uniform of a woman who wasn't afraid to get her hands dirty. Silas Thorne looked nothing like a Seattle executive. I had spent years being intimidated by suits. I expected a man who would demand a PowerPoint. Instead, the man who greeted me at the table was broad and weathered, with a white beard and eyes that had seen a million fires. He looked like he was carved out of a piece of hickory. He wore a denim shirt and didn't offer a business card. He offered a firm, calloused hand. "Rye Miller," he said. His voice was like gravel on a country road. "Cass tells me you've got a math brain for the pit, but the meat has to tell the story." He led me to the smokers. We pulled a brisket I'd been monitoring for 12 hours, its internal temperature a perfect 203 degrees Fahrenheit. He sliced into it, watching the way the juices pooled on the butcher paper. "I've been watching your smokehouse posts," Silas continued. "Your technical understanding of the stall and the rendering is elite. There's a precision here that most pitmasters take 20 years to master. You're not just cooking, you're engineering flavor." I didn't know what to say. I'd never heard my flexible skills described as elite. To my father, it was playing with charcoal. To Silas, it was engineering. "This bark," he pointed to the dark, peppery crust on the ribs. "It's consistent. It's intentional. That's what makes a pitmaster. You're not hiding behind the smoke. You're using it." He turned to me, and his next words felt like a system upgrade I finally deserved. "I want to offer you a residency at the Lone Star Smoke-Off Showcase. 15 of your signature briskets, opening night in 6 weeks. We'll handle the meat supply, the wood, and the marketing. You keep 60% of the ticket sales. We want to show Texas what a Seattle accountant can do with a fire." I signed the contract on a weathered picnic table on a Tuesday afternoon, the Texas sun beating down on the paper. The document was simple. 15 briskets, opening night scheduled for late August. The Culinary Foundation would handle the overhead: meat, wood, pits, staff, I would receive 60% of the revenue. Standard terms, Silas assured me. Fair terms. But to me, they were the first honest transaction of my life. As I read the pages, my hands were steady. Ready for the heat? Silas asked with a grin. It wasn't the business terms that made me take a deep breath. It was seeing my name in print. Lead pitmaster, Rye Miller. A legal document recognizing that my skill had market value, that I had value. I thought about all the hours I'd spent reconciling the Millers' charity accounts, all the holidays I'd spent in their kitchen while they toasted to their own brilliance. I had spent my life as the invisible fuel for their fire. Not once had my name appeared on anything that recognized my labor. Until now. The showcase title, Silas said, pointing to the header. We're going with The Algorithm of Smoke, Rye Miller's Texas debut. It's perfect, I said, my voice finally finding its full volume. I signed the line. Silas countersigned. The ink felt like a permanent rewrite of my life's code. When it was done, Silas handed me the copy. Congratulations, Rye. You're officially a professional pitmaster. I walked back to the pits, holding that contract like a shield. Physical proof that I wasn't a resource. I was a creator. The unpaid intern was dead. Rye Miller, the pitmaster, was just warming up. While I was building my new life in Texas, the Miller family was discovering that even the most advanced systems fail when they lose their primary support architecture. I didn't witness these events firsthand, but I heard them through a barrage of increasingly frantic voicemails and one very awkward, high-latency phone call from my father. It turns out that when you remove the unpaid intern who manages the back end, the entire luxury front end begins to glitch. Apparently, Hawaii was a total system crash. The Four Seasons Lanai is a high-tech paradise, but it's a paradise that requires someone to manage the logistics of 2 children under 5 without a pre-programmed user manual. Without me there to babysit, Sloan and Sterling couldn't enjoy a single investor-friendly dinner. They spent their bandwidth reset evenings arguing over whose turn it was to monitor the baby tracker, while the sound of the Pacific mocked them through the glass walls of their private villa. Oliver threw a tantrum on the beach because no one had remembered to pack his noise-canceling headphones, the ones I always kept charged and ready in his travel kit. It's funny how the low-value tasks I performed suddenly became the most critical dependencies in their life when they reached a 404 not found status. Sophie developed an ear infection on day 3, and nobody could access the pediatrician's cloud portal because I was the only one with the multi-factor authentication codes. My mother spent most of the trip complaining that the resort staff wasn't optimized for her specific needs. To Eleanor, the world was a service app, and she was outraged when she couldn't find the settings button to adjust the concierge's attitude. She called the general manager 3 times to complain about the low-resolution service and sent back her organic green juice twice. This isn't the experience I was promised, she reportedly said. Who managed the itinerary? My father wisely did not remind her that she had automated the planning by ordering me to do it. The texts started arriving on day 4, like a series of error messages from a dying server. Rye, what's the login for the pediatric portal? Rye, Oliver won't go into sleep mode. What's the routine? Rye, the resort doesn't have the organic kale nuggets. What's the fallback? I didn't respond. I was too busy living a life that didn't require me to be a human patch code for my sister's life. I was busy monitoring the stall on 15 briskets, managing the airflow in a 1,000-gallon smoker, and meeting with a journalist from Austin Monthly who wanted to profile the tech pitmaster. I was learning that when you stop being a utility for people who don't value you, you finally start becoming an asset to those who do. 6 weeks later, I stood in the center of the Lone Star Smoke-Off showcase and couldn't quite believe the output was real. The air was thick with the scent of post-oak smoke and the low hum of 500 hungry Texans. 15 of my signature briskets were resting in insulated warmers, each one a masterpiece of thermal engineering and time. The Smokehouse series was no longer a secret project. It was the main event under the bright Texas stars, its story told in peppercorn crusts and perfectly rendered fat. The pavilion glowed with string lights, craft beer was flowing from a dozen taps, and a crowd of people moved through the space. These weren't tech executives looking for a fix. These were connoisseurs who were studying my craft. I wore my heavy denim work shirt, simple, rugged, nothing that screamed for attention. Yet for the first time in my life, I felt like the highest value person in the room. My hair was tied back, and I'd even put on a pair of leather work boots, a choice that felt like planting my feet in the earth for the first time. Aunt Cass appeared at my side, handing me a cold Shiner Bock. "How's the internal temperature, kid?" "Spiking," I admitted. What if the critic hates the smoke ring? Someone already doesn't. She nodded toward a man in a wide-brimmed hat, examining the first tray of my brisket. "That's Silas Thorne. He just told the foundation board that this is the most technically perfect bark he's seen in a decade. $14,000 in projected ticket sales for a night I had engineered while my family thought I was stagnating in Seattle." Silas approached, grinning through his white beard. "I want to introduce you to a scout from the James Beard Foundation. They're looking at your algorithm approach for a new feature." I was halfway through that introduction when the system was interrupted by a familiar, discordant signal. Sloan and Sterling walked in, looking like Seattle tourists who had taken a wrong turn into the industrial district. They were dressed in pristine, outdoor wear that had never seen a speck of dust, looking completely out of sync with the grit of the Austin smoke. Then Sloan saw me. "Rye!" She rushed forward, her face a mask of performative relief that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Oh my God, we've been trying to ping you for days!" 50 guests turned to look. The rhythm of the slicers faltered for a second. "Sloan." I kept my voice level, the cool tone of a woman who had already moved her data to a better server. "This is a surprise. We had to fly in. Mom saw the article in the airline magazine on the way back from Maui. She's been in a total blackout trying to find you." Sterling appeared behind her, checking his Apple Watch, as if he were timing the interaction. "Rye, interesting setup. Bit of a pivot from accounting, isn't it? Looks a bit manual." "It's a residency," I said. "My showcase opening, actually." Sloan blinked, taking in the smokers, the crowd, the price per plate that represented a massive return on investment for my time. "You did all this? Since when do you do this?" "Since I decided my flexible time belonged to me. You never asked about my projects because you were too busy assigning me yours." Aunt Cass materialized at my elbow, a human firewall between me and their entitlement. Sloan leaned closer, her voice dropping into that crisis management whisper she used before a board meeting. "Rye, I have news. I'm pregnant again, number 3. And I really need you to re-onboard with us. Sterling's fund is going through an audit. Mom's no help. I need you." There it was. Not an apology, not a congratulations. just the familiar demand for a resource to fill their void. I need you. How many times had I executed that command? How many times had I crashed my own life to keep their brand running? Sloan, I said quietly, I'm in the middle of a 15 brisket service. I know, and this is quaint, really. She waved her hand at my pit mastery like it was a temporary glitch in my real career. But we can talk about the hobby later. Right, yeah. I need to know when you're coming back to Seattle. She's not coming back. Aunt Cass's voice was like sandpaper on steel. She scaled her own operation now. Sterling stepped forward, his corporate composure tightening. With all due respect, Cass, this is family bandwidth we're discussing. Family bandwidth? Aunt Cass laughed, a short, sharp bark of smoke-filled lungs. You mean the family that outsourced her to childcare and called her an unpaid intern in emails she wasn't supposed to access? Sloan went pale, the expensive Seattle tan on her face turning the color of ash. Around us, the connoisseurs had stopped eating. Silas Thorne stood nearby, watching the scene with the clinical detachment of a man watching a bad cook-off. I'm sorry, Sterling said, his voice dropping an octave. Who are you? Someone who just recognized her as a lead architect of flavor. Silas Thorne stepped into the light, his presence dominating the gravel lot. And someone who's very curious why a venture capitalist thinks a woman with this kind of output should go back to being a support system for his lifestyle. Your ROI on her seems a bit predatory, don't you think? The temperature in the pavilion seemed to spike another 10 degrees. The Miller family charm was falling apart in a world that valued results over rhetoric. I didn't retreat. For 32 years, I had been a background process. Not tonight. I stepped forward into the center of my own showcase and spoke with the authority of a lead developer. Sloan, I understand you're pregnant. Congratulations. But I won't be returning to Seattle to be your unpaid intern. You can hire a nanny. You can hire an entire staff. Sterling makes enough at the firm, and you've never had trouble allocating capital before. What you can't do is re-onboard me, because I was never on the payroll, and I have officially reached end of life for your demands. Silence. Absolute silence, except for the crackle of the wood fire in the pits. Sloane's eyes were filling with tears, real ones this time, born of the sudden realization that her utility was gone. Then Silas Thorne started to clap. Aunt Cass joined him. The crowd of Texans, people who understood the value of a hard day's work, raised their beer cans in a collective salute. It wasn't just a toast to my brisket. It was a go-live celebration for my new life. I didn't smile triumphantly. I simply looked at my sister and said, I hope your pregnancy is high performance. I truly do. But I am a pitmaster, not a resource. The pavilion gates opened again 20 minutes later. My parents stood there, looking like they had arrived at a rustic-themed wedding by mistake. My mother walked through the crowd with her Burberry trench coat pulled tight, despite the 90-degree heat. Rye, we need to have a one-on-one. I intercepted them before they could disrupt the service. You came all this way, I said evenly. Of course we did. You went dark. You left the family during a critical quarter, and now I find you here playing with fire while your sister is struggling. Sloan is resource-constrained, Mom, not struggling. Don't be difficult, Rye. This isn't the brand we built for you. You're right. It isn't the brand you wanted. the brand that existed to be acquired by your needs. I pulled out my phone. "Let me show you some data," I said, my voice steady. "This is an email you sent to Sloan." My mother's face went from pale to ghostly. I read the words. "Keep Rye here. It's like having an unpaid intern. She should be grateful." The words hung in the Texas air like bitter smoke. "I'm not reading this to shame you," I continued, though she looked thoroughly devalued. "I'm reading it so you understand why I migrated. You didn't see a daughter. You saw childcare overhead. And the intern has left the building." My mother left first, her social standing incinerated in a way that no PR firm could ever fix. Sloan lingered, her mascara smudged, looking like a device that had just lost its Wi-Fi connection. "Rye, I didn't think you processed it this way. I thought you liked helping." "No," I said. "You didn't think about it at all, and that was a system failure." They left, and the pavilion let out a collective sigh of relief. By the time the showcase ended that night, I had sold all 15 briskets, $14,000 in revenue, $8,400 profit, more than I'd made in a year of flexible accounting for the family. Today, I'm sitting on the back porch of the smokehouse, looking out at the Texas stars. The old DSLR camera I bought in Seattle still sits on my desk, but it's usually next to a meat thermometer and a logbook of wood types. Both matter. One taught me to see the truth. The other taught me to control the heat. My next showcase, Boundaries, opens next month. It explores the burn rate of obligation versus the slow cook of self-worth. I'm not rich, but my soul is scaling, and that's enough. Setting boundaries isn't a denial of service. It's the recognition that you cannot power a city from a dead battery. If you're in a situation like mine, remember, your worth isn't a metric defined by others. The bravest thing you can do isn't patch a broken relationship. It's uninstall the toxicity and build your own server.